Hello friends, this video on photosynthesis in higher plants part 24 is brought to you by examfear.com. No more fear from exam. And I think it is question time now. So we will discuss a few questions now just to give you an idea about whatever we have discussed so far. So let us look at question number 1. It says, by looking at a plant externally, can you tell whether the plant is a C3 or a C4? Why and how? Now, as I mentioned you before, there are quite a few differences which can be listed between a C3 and a C4 plant, but not all of them can be distinguished externally. Most of the differences between a C3 and C4 plant is in their anatomy. So, if you study their leaf anatomy, you will be able to find out a lot of differences. But without considering the leaf anatomy, you will have to look at the behavior of the plant. So the external features of C4 plants are they are adapted to dry tropical regions. So plants which are able to survive in dry regions, they can be considered as C4 because they have high temperature tolerance. That is why they are able to manage in dry regions. They have greater biomass productivity. So the biomass which you get out of these plants, that is quite large when compared to a C3 plant. So that is another way of telling whether it is a C3 or C4. But when you start studying their internal structure, then you get a lot of differences like the arrangement, the multiple layers of bundle sheath cells, or the compactness of C4 plants, or the larger number of chloroplasts in C4 plants. So there are many differences when you talk about their internal structure. But externally, these are some of the things which can tell you whether it is a C3 or a C4. Question number 2. Even though a very few cells in a C4 plant carry out the biosynthetic Calvin pathway, yet they are highly productive. Can you discuss why? So now in this case, what happens is that even though not all the cells are able to carry out Calvin pathway, so it is only the bundle sheath cells where Calvin pathway is taking place. But at the same time, if you see, there are many ways in which they are able to utilize more out of it. For example, when you talk about the process of photorespiration, that is in presence of light, they lose out some, they again lose out some of their energy, but that photorespiration doesn't take place in a C4 plant. So photorespiration occurs in C3 but does not occur in C4 plants. But again, for photorespiration also you need some ATP to be utilized. So if photorespiration is not happening, so you are able to save some ATP there. So some savings you are doing there. Again, when you talk about the process of photosynthesis, in case of C3 plants, it takes place only when the stomata is open. But in case of C4 plants, it can also take place when the stomata is closed. So that means also it is able to produce some more ATP. So they can perform photosynthesis even when stomata is closed. So that means they are able to produce more, and that is why they are more productive when compared to C3 plants. Higher rate of carbon assimilation in C4 plants, that means also it can assimilate more and more carbon. That is because in C4 plants, the carbon dioxide which enters into the Calvin cycle, it comes from the Hatch and Slack pathway. So it can assimilate more and more carbon so that it can continue the Calvin cycle even in absence of light. Question number 3. Rubisco is an enzyme that acts both as a carboxylase and oxygenase. Why do you think Rubisco carries out more carboxylation in C4 plants? Now talking about Rubisco, not only Rubisco, any enzyme has got a binding site, or which is also known as the active site or the substrate binding site. Now in case of Rubisco, the active site of Rubisco can bind to both oxygen as well as carbon dioxide, and that is why it acts as both oxygenase as well as carboxylase. So when it binds to carbon dioxide, it acts as carboxylase. When it binds to oxygen, it acts as oxygenase. Now in case of, now it depends on whether, now if carbon dioxide and oxygen both are present in its vicinity, it depends on which is present in more quantity. So the concentration of carbon dioxide is more, in that case carbon dioxide will bind to Rubisco and Rubisco will act as a carboxylase. If the concentration of oxygen is more, then oxygen will bind to Rubisco and it will act as an oxygenase. Now in case of C4 plants, if you see, the concentration of carbon dioxide is greater because in these plants there is no photorespiration. And what happens in photorespiration? It is just the opposite of photosynthesis. In photosynthesis, carbon dioxide is taken in and oxygen is given out. And in photorespiration, carbon dioxide is given out and oxygen is taken in. So if photorespiration is not happening, that means you are able to save some carbon dioxide, right? Because you are not giving out carbon dioxide. So the concentration of carbon dioxide is actually increasing because photorespiration doesn't happen. That means the concentration of carbon dioxide increases. So since the relative concentration of carbon dioxide is more than oxygen, therefore Rubisco finds more carbon dioxide around and it binds to carbon dioxide and acts as carboxylase in C4 plants. Question number 4. Suppose there were plants that had a high concentration of chlorophyll B but lacked chlorophyll A. Would it carry out photosynthesis? Now the question is, chlorophyll A is the main pigment responsible for photosynthesis. It is a necessary pigment, as I mentioned before also. So if something which is necessary is not there, that process will not take place. So even though it has a high concentration of chlorophyll B, but chlorophyll B is an accessory pigment. So it is just a good to have pigment. So even though you have so much of it, that is of no use if chlorophyll A, which is a necessary pigment, is not there. So therefore photosynthesis will not take place if it lacks chlorophyll A. So it will not take place without chlorophyll A. So now the next question is, then why do plants have chlorophyll B and other accessory pigments? So now if photosynthesis can take place without accessory pigments, then what is the point of having them? As I mentioned before, these accessory pigments have got specific roles for themselves. One role is they help to protect chlorophyll A from photooxidation. So they basically ensures protection of chlorophyll A because they know chlorophyll A is necessary. So they try to protect chlorophyll A. Next, second is they help to occur some photosynthesis in other regions of the spectrum. Because when you talk about chlorophyll A absorbs light only in the blue and the red regions. That is why maximum photosynthesis occurs in these two regions. But due to the presence of these accessory pigments, some small amount of photosynthesis also take place in the yellow region. So that is because of these accessory pigments. So small amount, it adds on to the effect. So similarly, when light falls on these pigments, the accessory pigments, they also absorb some wavelength and transfer that energy to the main pigment, that is chlorophyll A. Now the last question for this lesson. Why is the color of a leaf kept in the dark frequently yellow or pale green in color? Which pigment do you think is more stable? Okay. So in this case, if you keep a leaf in dark, you do not expose it to lot of sunlight. So what do you think will happen? So when there is lot of light, the pigment inside it will try to absorb the red and the blue regions. Which pigment will try to absorb that? Chlorophyll A. So in that case, the green will get reflected and that is why the leaf will appear green. But now the leaf is kept in dark. So what is happening? It is appearing yellow or pale green. That is because now the chlorophyll A is not active, because chlorophyll A is good at absorbing the blue and the red regions of the spectrum. But now not enough light is there, so it is not able to absorb the blue and red regions properly. So chlorophyll becomes less stable in absence of light. Therefore, the green color becomes lighter because chlorophyll is not active, and if chlorophyll is not active, it will not be able to absorb the blue and red regions of the blue and red light of the visible spectrum. So which is more stable, you think? Right now, the leaf appears yellow. So that yellowish color mostly comes because of the pigment xanthophylls. Because they are yellowish in color, so they generally absorb all other colors and reflect the yellow ones, and that is why xanthophylls would be more stable under such condition. So when the light is in dark, xanthophylls are more stable when compared to chlorophyll. So with this, I'll end this lesson, and I hope that the concepts of photosynthesis is clear to you now. If not, Please replay the videos over and again. So see you all in the next lesson. Thank you. Please visit www.examfear.com to watch more videos, attempt free online test, get free study material, find tutors and mentors. Thank you once again.